Citizen Book Club. Today is Saturday, June 28th. My name is Keshet Benchikovsky. I'm the new program associate with Citizens for Global Solutions and your moderator for today's book club. I'm pleased to see you all here today. This is a great turnout, and we have some new faces as well, so very excited. Welcome, everyone. We are recording today's session, as I mentioned, so you can expect an abridged version of the session that will be made available on CGS's YouTube channel in due course. I would like to recommend everyone that remind everyone that while book club is an open forum for discussion, we want authors to be able to speak freely and, where appropriate, to be able to do so off the record. And so I have turned off our AI assistant, and we do not allow AI assistants to record this session. So if I see that there's any on, I will need to deactivate them from my side. And again, we have some new faces. So if this is the first time, your first time here, and you would like to be kept informed about upcoming book club sessions, please drop a message or send me a message in the chat, so that way I can add you to our group email. So yeah, today is the first session on the Humble Cosmopolitan, Rights, Diversity, and Trans-State Democracy by Professor Luis Cabrera. Louis joins us today as we cover on this session chapters 1 to 3. If you haven't already done so, you can buy the book on Amazon. I will put the link in the chat once I have concluded with this introduction. And before we begin, I would just like to go over a few more housekeeping, and then we'll hand it off to Louis. Firstly, to ensure that everyone gets a chance to join in, I will ask everyone to keep their questions or comments to about 2 minutes. If you exceed the 2-minute time, I will interject to ask you to wrap up, so that way everyone is able to have the opportunity to speak. And once everyone who is interested has had the opportunity to ask a question or make a comment, I will open the floor again for further discussion with a second round of questions and comments if necessary. So with that, does anyone object to the community agreements of the Q&A? No? Okay, thank you. Yeah, when we get to the Q&A, you can raise your hand virtually or physically, or put your questions in the chat. I'll be making a note of everyone, and we'll be sure to come to you on a first come, first served basis. But if I miss you, please just keep your hand up and I will get to you. And in regard to the timing, we'll stop at 10 minutes before the end of the session at around 8:20. For any announcements people may wish to make about the relevant events or about things they want to promote. I know I have some exciting updates. And then just as Louis begins his introduction, I ask that you please hold on to any comments you may have that are not related to the book club until the end, or you can put them in the chat at any time. Same goes with your questions as we get started. Yeah, so with the housekeeping out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce the author of the Humble Cosmopolitan, Rights, Diversity, and Trans-State Democracy, and today's speaker, Professor Luis Cabrera. Welcome. Luis Cabrera is a professor of political science at Griffith University in Brisbane, Australia. His research is focused on theories and practices of democracy, human rights, and regional and global citizenship. He has authored 3 books and edited or co-edited 3 others, besides publishing more than 40 journal articles and book chapters. His most recent monograph, published in 2020, is The Humble Cosmopolitan, Rights, Diversity, and Trans-State Democracy, which we will be discussing in our 3 sessions. With all that said, it's my pleasure to hand it over to you, Louis. Please take it away, and welcome again.
Thank you very much, and sorry for the false start there. So just to recap, I started my academic career. I used to be a journalist before this for the Associated Press, covering the World Trade Organization, battle in Seattle and that sort of thing. So I came to this wanting to be able to take a side on certain issues and wanted to talk about the normative ideas or the moral ideas behind what's going on in the world. So for me, as I was beginning my studies, I very quickly settled on the idea that I was interested in universal rights and how we might create a world system in which the rights of all persons could be reasonably secure, or to put it another way, how what kind of world could we create in which anyone born anywhere would have very good chances at a decent material life. Um, being able to have enough to eat, being able to have good employment opportunities, being able to move where they needed to move, medical care, all those sorts of things that you would want for your own kids. How do we get that for everyone? And I very quickly settled on the idea that some sort of democratically accountable global integration was the way to go. So my first book, which was my dissertation, looked at that, talked to cosmopolitans about if you really support universal rights, if you really think there are duties to all persons in the world, you should support some form of global government. And I at that time called it a world state. I'm not sure what I outlined was really a world state, because it doesn't necessarily have a monopoly on collective violence in the way that most people would think when you talk about a world government. It might disperse coercive capacity across regions, things like that. Because for me, if you begin with rights, rather than say, how do we control nuclear weapons in the way, that animated so much of the debate in the 1940s and beyond, if you begin with the idea, how do we get everybody's rights secured, then you begin to think harder, I think, about how do we create a system that secures rights but does not threaten those rights too far. And I think for those, I'm a U.S. citizen, and for those living in the States right now, those questions are very much coming to the foreground. In as our government appears to want to threaten rights more every day for individuals. So that was the first book. The second book, I wanted to think about. I've worked on different aspects of a rights-based world government, a rights-advancing world government. So for the second one, I had to start thinking about, well, what are our duties as individuals to each other and to advancing that sort of system? And so that book was The Practice of Global Citizenship. And there I started doing what has come to be called grounded normative theory, but really it's just me as a reporter wanting to get back out in the streets, back out in the field, and actually talk to some people rather than just sit in my sort of academic ivory tower and think thoughts, engage with philosophers. So I did a lot of interviews for that book, trying to get a sense for what things looked like in the world of humanitarian action, of anti-humanitarian action. So I had this idea that global citizens are people who are reaching across national boundaries to help protect the rights of others. And a lot of people are doing that, whether you're talking about these days, the protesters who are trying to protect people from these very dubious ICE raids that end up with no due process. People are shipped overseas without ever seeing a judge, etc. And back then, there were a lot of migrant rights folks, and I kind of focused on them. I was in Arizona at Arizona State University, and so I had easy access to the border, and I started spending time with humanitarian patrollers in the desert because the government in the mid 90s adopted a policy where they were going to shut down the relatively easier urban border crossings and push people out into the desert, thinking that that would stop them from coming. And what it did was it didn't stop them from coming, but it meant that a lot more people died. So these humanitarian groups sprang up that were bringing water to people, that were bringing medical care, first aid to people, and trying to find them as they were lost in the desert so they didn't die. And they saved a number of lives. So I did participant observer work with them, embedded work, and then I also did just interviews with people on the other side, so civilian border patrollers. You may remember the Minutemen from around 2006, where they would take it upon themselves to go down to the border and try to spot people coming across. Sometimes they would actually detain them and then call the Border Patrol. So I wanted to get a sense for how both of them justified their actions. How do you what motivates you to do that sort of humanitarian work, and what motivates you to do the sort of anti-humanitarian work, or the security work, trying to secure national borders. I went to Spain asking some of the same questions, because Spain was just as much of an entry point for African migrants and people from all over the world, actually, who came to Africa and then tried to get in. And there were lots of people trying to get in, lots of people trying to help them. Not so many groups organized in opposition to them, but there were a lot of questions to answer there as well. And then I went up to Brussels, the European Union headquarters, to talk to people there and try to get a better idea. So in the end, what I got was a lot of insight about what global citizenship might really look like on the ground, and how we might talk about global citizenship that's institutionally oriented, supporting the kinds of institutions that could actually help advance individual rights. And then this third book that we're looking at today, there was a problem I needed to deal with, which is that anytime you start talking about world government, of course, people talk about tyranny, they talk about imperialism. You're talking about universal rights. Aren't you just imposing these sort of Judeo-Christian Western ideas on the rest of the world? And I felt like we really need an answer for that. And we need an answer that's focused not just on, defending universal rights per se, but on defending universal institutions to protect those rights and advance those rights. So I again started looking for people to talk to. And I came upon this group in India called the National Campaign on Dalit Human Rights, Dalits formerly called Untouchables. And they were reaching out to the UN human rights regime to try to press their own government for better action against caste discrimination in India, which is still quite a big issue there. And they were speaking in the language of universal human rights, and they were seeking to promote universal human rights against a very strong set of religious attitudes in Hinduism that said that they were to be treated as lesser persons. So all their lives, they're told, you're, Dalits, you've got a certain role to play. This isn't oppression. This is harmony. This is how God wants it. And they're pushing back and say, no, actually, we have rights. And the person who inspired them was Ambedkar, who appears on the cover of the book. And he lived from 1891 to 1956 and was a very active universal rights champion. And he specifically championed the universal rights of Dalits. And so he spoke in this language. He got audiences anywhere he could overseas. He looked to the United Nations as a possible place where Dalits could get justice against their own state. That didn't work out, but only because he ended up writing the Indian Constitution, basically, or leading the drafting of it. And so he said he wanted to put his energies there. But they're inspired by Ambedkar. I discovered his work through them and became, incredibly inspired myself. And I said, okay, this guy is making the arguments that we need to be able to make to defend against these sort of imperialism objections that we're just trying to impose, Western ideas, because he in fact faced a lot of those same objections, as you'll see, when he wrote the Constitution, which talks about universal rights. It doesn't talk about the rights of the Hindu and other things the way that Hindu nationalists would want. So that was that book, and the current book is it's about getting to world government. And it's about how we get there from here. And I'll tell you, if back in 1995, when I started this odyssey, if I could have selected a time to talk about getting to world government, it would have been 1995, not 2025, because we've seen this recession in democracy. We've seen the rise of the would-be tyrant in state after state after state. So it's not a great time to be thinking in the near term. But my work has consistently said, we don't think in the near term. We think in terms of gains we can make, rights gains. And so I've got a mantra for the current book. I'll share it with you and then I'll stop there. So the idea that's animating the book, and I've already done 100 interviews for it. I've interviewed people at the United Nations in New York, UNESCO in Paris, again, the European Union. I've interviewed people at the African Union, the Pan-African Parliament, Mercosur in South America, ASEAN here in Southeast Asia, and a few other places as well. And then I've slowly been working my way around to the World Federalist folks for your insights as well. And the book will argue that we have more world government than we think, but less than we need. We need less than many have thought. and we can have more than it may seem, even now, even in the current climate. So I'll leave it right there.
Thank you, Louis. Um, so we can now open the floor to any questions. I ask that you either raise your virtual or physical hand, or you could put your questions in the chat and I'll just come to you on a first come, first served basis. So I saw Virginia, you had your hand, so please go on ahead, and everyone, just as a reminder, please try to keep your questions to 2 minutes, and then once we go through the first round, we'll have the chance to have more questions put through. Thank you.
Louis, thank you so much. And it's really great to meet you. I wanted to ask, your last statement was very provocative. It's a great way to end. But I just wanted you to go into that a little bit more, why you said that. And secondly, what's it like to have been a journalist first? And what do you bring from journalism to this new, not, it's relatively new. I don't know the dates that you left journalism, but it's fascinating that you have that lens of a journalist and a scholar. I think it's a great combination.
Well, I'll take the last question first. I often say that as a political theorist, I'm a pretty good journalist. So the training was invaluable, and I worked for the AP, Associated Press. I started as a cub reporter intern in 1989, and worked there with breaks for graduate school until 2002. And so, covered plane crashes and shootings and city council meetings and everything else you can think of. And it was excellent training for being an academic, tell you the truth. And it enabled me to be able to, become very comfortable asking questions, going out, getting information, and I just these days I just don't feel comfortable talking about much of anything unless I've talked to people with real expertise in that area. And so on the provocative statement, so the mantra. Why do I say that? Well, let me unpack it a little bit then. So we have more world government than we think. We being, I guess, the average person who doesn't think about world government these days. And that's because we, as a species, we keep trying to create these shadow world governments in the first place. So we've got, the Concert of Europe back in 1815 after the Napoleonic Wars. So heads of state say, hey, we need to be able to get together occasionally and talk about things rather than go to war on flimsy pretexts. So they met periodically throughout the 1800s. And then you've got the Hague peace conferences in the early 1900s, where even more heads of state. So that was more comprehensive. It wasn't just a few heads of state in Europe. It was diplomats from all over the world coming together and talking about, well, how do we limit these terrible weapons of war? How do we enforce peace? How do we create a system in which states will have to go to arbitration, with a neutral third party rather than just go to war? So how do we head off war that day? That didn't work ultimately because we had World War I. After that, of course, we got the League of Nations, which was really inspiring to a lot of people. They thought this was the way we were going to be able to enforce peace. The U.S. Senate didn't ratify it. The United States was never part of it. It had other problems. It actually had quite a few successes in its first decade, but then it kind of fell away. Italy invaded Ethiopia, said, what are you going to do about it? Turns out they couldn't do a lot about it, et cetera, et cetera. So we get World War II. After World War II, we get the United Nations. Now, a lot of people would say the UN has been a failure in terms of security. I'd say it's more complex than that. I'd say overall, it's achieved an awful lot of what it was set out to achieve. So no, it can't stop Russia from invading Ukraine. Who could? Who could? If Russia really wants to invade Ukraine, it's going to, right? The U.S. can't stop it. What are they going to do? Fire a nuclear weapon? That's not going to work. But there have been scores of peacekeeping missions that have actually saved, thousands, if not millions of lives all around the world, more than 70 of them. That's just in security. If you look at the other track of world government, which I like to think of as the justice track or advancing individual rights, the UN's agencies are tasked with acting like the agencies of a world government. If we had a world government, I submit, it would have all these agencies. It would have the Food and Agricultural Organization. It would have all of the ones that do humanitarian work, that help with development work, that help with education. And they do excellent work every single day on a shoestring budget. So I think when we talk about having more world government, we've already got the structure in place. It's not a perfect, effective structure. It's not democratic, but there's an awful lot of world government already in place. And then if you look below the global level to the regional organizations, the European Union is a mini world government. 500 million was about how many people we had in what, 1776, around there. Just choose that date randomly. So it covers almost 500 million people, 17,000 common laws that all the states have bound themselves to. It's not a state in that it's not going to send the National Guard to your town when things erupt, but it's very state-like. And then you've got organizations all around the world that are trying to replicate that. So Mercosur has free movement. And that enabled Venezuelans. I don't know how many lives of Venezuelans people it saved, but that free movement was extended to them. And so they came by more than 1 million into Argentina, for example. Other places, African Union is probably within the next 20 years, we'll see the free movement protocol get up. They've got one on the books. They're just trying to get enough ratifications. ASEAN is a little bit of a different creature, but it's also trying to promote regional development, et cetera. So we have more world government than we think. We have less than we need for reasons I've outlined. We need less than many have thought. So then maybe that's the provocative part, because what I would say is that, again, we probably don't want a very, very powerful world government that's capable. In the 1940s, Einstein said, I would rather face a world of tyranny than a world of nuclear weapons, basically. And I think that's just not going to work for so many reasons. And if somehow, let's say the US became powerful enough again and we had a super Obama or someone, everybody on the hard right thought Obama was trying to lead us to world government, who could impose it in the way that many people in the 40s were saying, hey, the US should just impose world government right now while we've got the monopoly on nuclear weapons. I think it would devolve into civil war fairly quickly. There'd be all these secessions. So unfortunately, I think we have to do it slowly. And the end point should probably not be this collective monopoly on violence, at least not right away. That should be our ultimate goal. But I think it comes through integrating economically, integrating democratically, helping every state become democratic. So we're talking about many hundreds of years toward that end point that we would all say, oh, okay, this is a just world government. But I think we can have a lot more world government along the way.
Thank you, Louis. I think Bob Flax's hand was up next.
No, Ted was up before me.
Yeah, please go ahead, Ted Daly.
Thank you, Bob Flax. Thank you, Cachette. I have 4 quick points, and my last one is a question. First of all, Professor, great to see you. We've known each other for years, and it's great to see you here online. And wow, the Humble Cosmopolitan is a terrific title. And when you gave your 1-sentence sort of tagline, when you said after laying the foundation about your previous work, this is about how to get the world government, that immediately makes me want to read your stuff and get my hands on this, and I will. Because I, as somebody who have talked about the world government idea for many, many years, sometimes to complete novices, often, most of the time, to complete novices, they often ask that question, Louise, before I finish my first paragraph. But how are you going to get there? Well, that's impossible. Well, that'll never happen. So just to confront that question straight on is crucially important. My second point is I look forward to meeting you in person in about 6-7 weeks, as Professor Barada mentioned, in London.
I wish I were coming. I'm actually going to be virtual, I'm afraid.
Oh, man.
Sorry about that. Ian didn't make that clear. So
once again, knowing you virtually, but not yet in person. Let me just quickly tell the assembled here that it's a very interesting conference in London, assembled at the University of London, Birkbeck College. Professor Barada mentioned it, to address the question, quote, Does the world need a government? Question mark. And boy, that, off and on, I think it's fair to say, for the past 78 years, this organization's main raison d'etre has been to try to convince people to answer that question in the affirmative. So I look forward to seeing you virtually there. And finally, much as I want to get more into your book, and I'm going to get my hands on it and read it, you and I know each other, of course, through your World Government Research Network. And you've been kind enough to publish a lot of my writings there. And I think it's about 10 years old. And I just wonder if you would tell us a little bit about what it is and what it does and what is your vision and your own raison d'etre for the World Government Research Network.
Sure. Yeah, in fact, I just I was Googling around and I was reminded of your good piece on Harris Wofford and Kennedy, so I reread that. So really great stuff. You've been right there at the coal face, as it were. So the World Government Research Network was founded in 2015. And the idea was there were a lot of academics, we realized, who were writing about world government in various ways. They didn't always call it world government, but they were writing about, global democracy, global integration, all these things. So we thought it would be great to get them together in more of a conversation. And I'll be honest with you, it's been a challenge in the time of Trump to keep that going. So when 2016 came along, and Trump first came in and was making all this negative talk about globalists, we had a lot of people drop out, honestly, or a lot of people drop out of the dialogues. I guess they would say, "I'm not writing about world government anymore. I'm writing about other things," and they wouldn't say why, but and then there was a brief respite with Biden, but now we're right back to even more vitriolic anti-globalism. And I'm beginning to have a think about what we might do in this time, what we might be able to say, because we want academic freedom, and we want people to be able to feel like they can follow the work where it takes them. And if that's to global integration, then that's where they should be able to go. And unfortunately, it's becoming a very fraught environment back in the States. So many state legislatures are trying to exert control, as far as I can see from an outsider, over what happens in the classroom, what happens in research. So academic freedom is under threat right now. So I think we as an organization probably have a role to play in this, and we're starting to think about what that might be. We can't provide cover for someone who's trying to write about world government and is being told by their dean that the state legislature is threatening to shut down, a unit or something, or meddling in some way. We can't provide that cover, but certainly we can make a statement that says academic freedom is really, really important, and this is an important way to talk about global or institutions. So kind of a scary answer, but it's kind of a scary time we're living in. And
Thank you, Louis. Maybe we can go on ahead to you, Bob.
Sure. Hi, Louis. We've corresponded just a little bit, but it's nice to see you. At least we've advanced the connection. So I assume you know Fernando Iglesias, the vice president of WFM, and he has said some couple of years ago at one of the WFM council meetings that in order to have a world government, we're going to need millions of people out in the street demanding it, rather than just the rarefied, the academics and a few politicians here and there, or a couple of activists. We're going to really need a wide-scale social movement. But as the movement knows, we really haven't focused on that as much, maybe a bit here or there. Okay? So recently, a transnational working group has formed in the World Federalist Movement. I'm in that group. I'm on the board of WFM, and to do just that, to look at movement building and have a grassroots movement from the ground up of the world's people. supporting then whoever's up there, doing the more rarefied work. So my question to you, from everyone you've spoken to and all that you know, is if you were to consult to a group like that, what advice, what pointers, or what things do you think they should avoid, or what have you, speaking to the quote unquote worldwide general public?
Mm, mm. Boy, that's a tough one. Because again, we're still, I'm reminded of the Vermont farmer. The couple from the city is driving, they're driving along the country roads and they're lost, and they pull up alongside this farmer in his field, and they say, "Well, how do you get to this place we're trying to get to?" And he thinks for a moment. And he says, "Well, I wouldn't start from here." Um, so I guess the question is, what's possible? How can what are you trying to achieve in the near term, and how can you leverage what you can do? So in the near term, so I haven't fully thought this through yet. So let me begin by saying there's that wonderful book that Matthias Koenig Archibugi. So that's many of you may know him. You probably know his brother Daniele Archibugi, but Matthias is sort of the quieter brother who's kind of in the background doing his statistics, and at the end of the day, I think he's going to be the one who leads academics to think that world government is feasible, because he's run all the numbers. He's run these incredibly complex statistics that I can't begin to do myself, and has found that global democracy is feasible to achieve. It would be sustainable. It would be comparable to most states. For my money, the movement, or a long-term movement toward global government, would need to start with restoring and reinforcing and advancing democracy within nation states. The most hopeful I was about opportunities for advancing global integration, democratically accountable global integration, was during the height of the anti-globalization protests. So you had, I mentioned that I covered the World Trade Organization protests in 1999 in Seattle. And, I was out in the streets for 7 days with protesters. There were 50,000 people. They came from all over the world. They shut down the city. They were chanting outside of the delegation rooms. We want in, basically. And they were saying, if you're going to make so many decisions in this organization, and at that time, the World Trade Organization looked very, very powerful, because states were working through it to basically impose a lot of regulations on other states, trade, but also, an anecdote, there were raids in Chinese villages on pirated DVDs because of the intellectual property rights rules that were being made in the WTO. So a lot of people were saying, hey, this is starting to look like a world government. We want in. We want to democratize this. So they had something on which to focus. They had a place in which they could try to drive that wedge. And then you had, journalists and people like that saying, hey, are we seeing a world government emerge? Is this what's happening? And then, of course, soon after that, you had 9/11. Then a few years later, you had the global financial crisis. A few years later, you had Donald Trump. So in terms of developing a worldwide movement right now, it's a challenging time. But it's always worth doing. It's always worth doing. Do we lead with world government, or do we lead with global citizenship? What's the thinking in your group?
Well, we're debating that right now, looking at messaging, languaging, inclusion in the core group. We're going to be discussing that at the next meeting. So I don't know that we've come to consensus about a lot of the big questions. We're more articulating what the questions are, and people are brainstorming what are the different perspectives on them. So your question is a little bit ahead of where we are at the moment.
Yeah, I guess one thing to think about is what are the threats we're all facing as human beings right now? And what can make us all feel connected? Of course, there's climate change, but there are also threats to liberty. Everyone is feeling this threat from the hard right, even if they're in a stable democracy. Australia is probably the most insulated country in the world, but everybody else, And it can happen here. It's happening in so many other places. Is there room for a movement that draws people together who love liberty and who want decent government all around the world? And then is that a way to drive a wedge in and say, yes, we all want decent domestic governments, and one of the ways in which we can reinforce that is by having decent global institutions. So maybe shared threats is the way to think about it right now, because we're all under pressure.
That is one of the themes that we're looking at. Yeah. We'll talk at some other time then. This is a
Yeah, definitely.
long discussion.
You're still on my interview list, Bob. I've been buried in trying to write up some of the stuff, but I'm
No
about
problem.
to
I'm
come
buried
back at
too.
it.
We all are.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Joseph, would you like to share your question with the group?
Well, I'm a historian, and I tend to look at things in the long-term, big picture. I must say I was very hopeful after the end of the Cold War. I thought that why the United States could cooperate with Russia, and there was a movement called the Partnership for Peace, where some 41 former republics of the Soviet Union and all the 15 members of the Union all belonged. And I thought that NATO might be developed into a collective security organization, and that would permit closer integration of peoples. And then everything has come unraveled with NATO expansion. And finally, Putin invaded Ukraine to prevent its participation. And I really feel that the cause of world federation has been set back by 50 years. And what I see emerging in its place is a bid for world empire by the United States. It's kind of this recent attack upon Iran is rather typical. The United States acted alone, and it just bombed another country. It did so for the good purpose of preventing a 10th nuclear power to emerge. And indeed, this is a runaway disaster which could unravel the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And there are some 44 countries that have the potential to develop nuclear weapons. And another treaty, the collective general ban on testing, requires all 44 to agree, and all but I think it's 12 states in the world have ratified the general testing ban. Well, but we always come up against this little remnant of the great powers, the sovereign powers, who resist this process, and I cannot imagine a world federation, kind of along the lines of Blumel's World Parliament, being able to assemble the will and the power to stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. The whole thing is so fraught with danger and difficulty that nothing happens, and the United States steps into the breach. If you look at you made historical references to Napoleon Bonaparte, and what is happening is that the sovereign states, some say they're too small for the world and too big for the people. The sovereign states are not able to, by cooperation, establish joint security. And so the last surviving great power, which happens to be my country, is acting like a world government. Daniel Downey, who's in your WG research group, says plainly in one of his writings that the United States is the de facto world government. And I fear the continuation of the present day tendencies. Last year, some 80 countries voted in national elections, and you know, Trump was not alone in moving back to nationalism and anti-globalization and neglect of the environment. The whole world is doing that. They all feel they're so weak and so imperiled, sometimes by Russia, but sometimes by the United States or China, why that they think they can only find security alone. And this is a formula for complete failure. There are warnings of World War III all around. I thought the Israelis would attack Natanz and Fordo, but lo and behold, the United States, with its B-2 bombers, did a nice job, and they failed actually to destroy the uranium stockpiles at Fordo. We know this. So what have we gained? Have we stopped Iran from developing nuclear weapons? No, we haven't. But we have destroyed what little comity between nations in the Middle East that it was developing. So Louis, I would like to say one little thing because I think you're on one of the good tracks. It's business about starting with human rights. I once wrote a little book about human rights, and I'm very distressed that for all this rhetoric about human rights, we have not been able to establish, like the Europeans, a court of human rights. You know, we who's going to enforce the human rights? And then I think, well, if we had a world government and established a court of human rights, then you could ask people, well, are you ready to submit to the jurisdiction of a world parliament upon which peoples of other nations would have equitable representation and allow that parliament to enact laws, including laws governing human rights, and submit to it? I don't think we're ready for that. I don't think the world, the peoples of the various nations are ready for a court of human rights to which they would submit. So I don't know. I was thinking about Ambedkar. He's Indian. And one of the things that Indians, Dalit, of course, but one of the I had to wonder, well, who's the Western comparable figure? And this would be Martin Luther King. These people make progress, but not to the point where we've established a court of human rights. And I don't think in the coming, I fear war, and I don't think in the coming war there's going to be much space for the protection of human rights. I think it's all going to come to a great catastrophe, and that will provide the crisis, if it isn't enough already, the crisis that would motivate great numbers of people to go to the streets and demand a different kind of organization of the nations of the globe. It'll happen after war, just as the League did and after the United Nations did. It will happen, but through great suffering.
I hope you're wrong, but we'll see, you know. I mean, history certainly has shown that those were the points when we got the most um, institution building at the global level. I guess what I would say is one thing that Leif Wenar once told me. He's a political philosopher who's now at Stanford, and he wrote a book on how to deal with tyrants who have control over the oil resources. And he said something that I thought was very wise, that you never know when there'll come a moment when change can happen, but when that moment comes, you want the arguments and the plans to be available. So he was writing a book at a time, published in 2015, when there seemed no way in the world of getting the oil revenues out of the hands of tyrants, et cetera, and into the hands of the people of their countries. But his thought was that, well, when the more propitious moment comes, this book will be there as a resource. These ideas will be there as a resource. And I think one of the things the world government movements have been doing for a very long time is giving us the ideas as a resource. And my hope is that we don't have to have World War III to get more and more world government over time, but we shall see. One thing I will say is that Trump won't live forever, and this current moment won't last forever. When you'll certainly remember, Professor, back in the Cold War period, I think there was one political scientist who predicted the fall of the Soviet Union, and his work got almost no attention. No one took him seriously because the consensus was so strong that the Soviet Union was just going to roll on and on and on. And then 1989 happened. So I think the pendulum will swing the other way. People will see more and more where this sort of hard right governance gets us, which is not very far. And we'll see more and more of this sort of no kings type protest. And within 5 years, hopefully it won't take 10, the pendulum will swing the other way. And it's when we have more progressive governments in the leading states that we see more advance on integration regionally, but also globally. The right, with few exceptions, doesn't really want to see more global integration. That's a project of the left. So the right is dominating right now. You're right, but I think the pendulum will swing sooner than we may realize.
Thank you, Louis. Let's go next to Bob Flax and then Virginia and Winston.
I think Winston
had his physical hand up before I put my cyber hand up.
Please, Winston, go
ahead. Thank you. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yes. And thank you, Louis, for your presentation. And I think we share some important views on global citizenship, etc. But we have some differences. I think the world at large is operating on a principle of fear. The nation-state system was built on fear, people fearing each other. And we develop arms to accentuate that fear. The state that has the greatest amount of arms, they are called great powers, not because of any ethical achievements they've had, but they have weapons, large amount of weapons. They can kill other people. They can take a value that is important, life, and they can do many other things. come down with Bob Flocks, and that we have to operate on a different ethical grounding. One that is based on people getting to know each other through popular nonviolence effort, a global effort. We get to know each other not because of what the elites who want to use deterrence and force, but people who are interested in saying that I share this with you. Here are the values we share with one another. And in that sense, I think you would have found in the Ambedkar the Great, the contemporary of Elizabeth I, you look at his record in the same India about which you spoke. We don't have to wait until Ambedkar. He's the man that is extending universal values, as it were. We've got the Gita. That will tell us something else. The entire body of Confucian ethics. And let us speak of the golden rule which is found in every great religious tradition. Root ethics. Why can't those be used? This is part of the universalism that we ought to be emphasizing and demonstrating to people that we have all of this in common, and not to depend on those who subsist in their powers by dividing us. So, I submit that what we need is a global nonviolence movement that is based on our commonalities, our alikeness, confronting those who want to insist that we are so different that we have to arm ourselves against the other.
Thank you. Not to sound glib, but I completely agree. I completely agree with what you're saying, that that is our ultimate aim. So I think you may be responding to what I was saying earlier to Bob about where you start from where we are.
Mm.
And I fear that that where we are is not Akbar's India, not Chandragupta's India, but Mr. Modi's India, which is a very different, very ugly place. I'm reminded. So I just I've got an article that's just coming out on Indian visions of world government, and so I focus a little bit on Ambedkar's vision of what could be done with the United Nations, but especially Nehru and Gandhi and so many of the other figures who were their allies. They were aligned with them, and we're outlining this vision of an anti-imperial, egalitarian world government, and it was in line with Gandhi's teachings. And Gandhi was one who inspired people all over the world in just the way you're talking about. So he had so many people from so many countries coming to visit him, including Martin Luther King, who took a lot of his inspiration from Gandhi. And so Tad would know that Harris Wofford arranged funding for that trip. I just discovered, and I think that is our aim. I mean, if someone asked me and said, okay, we've got $100 billion, what kind of movement should we have? I'd say, well, how about a Gandhian nonviolence global movement of the kind that people in the 40s were actually, and early 50s were trying to mount. I think that would be the most inspiring, the most defensible. I guess the question that I'm asking right now is, how do we get to something like that from where we are? Because where we are is such an ugly place.
Just allow me one response here. Suppose we begin by re-examining the history we teach. Suppose, for example, we began with the Babylonian captivity, where the Jews are being, enslaved. And what is the power that in fact relieved that enslavement? The Persians defeating the Babylonians and setting the Jewish people free. Then Cyrus the Great and his emergence in what we today call human rights. It would remove from the sense that human rights were created in the West and imposed on other people, etc. In fact, it emerged out of many multiple cultures, as it were. So my question is, what about how we go about teaching social and political history? What is it our children are learning?
It's a good point.
Yeah.
It's a good point.
Thank you, Winston and Lewis. Maybe we can go on back ahead to Bob and then Virginia. And Joseph, is that a legacy hand or do you have another question?
No, that's
From before.
resting my brain.
Okay. All right. So off to you, Bob.
Sure. Well, I have two quick points off of actually things that Joseph said earlier, and one off of something Lewis said earlier, and I'll try to do it in 2 minutes altogether. So so I think while it's true, I mean, obviously that the world now is going through a wave of autocratization as opposed to democratization. Also, some people have pointed out that what may really be under it is a kind of throw the bums out philosophy, because even the places that were right wing got thrown out and left wing governments got put in. So there might be some kind of global discontent under it all, not necessarily or exclusively all about going to the right, but going to something different than what we have. So just to put that in the soup. Point two is that just an observation that I've had in the last year or two being on these conference calls with World Federalists around the world. I think it is the case that up until the last couple of years, there's been a tone of optimism that, whereas it took World War I to do the League of Nations, World War II to do the UN, that we could head it off at the pass, before there's World War III or before there's some global environmental calamity, that we could actually get this done and not have the big explosion, whatever it is. And I have to say, and it saddens me to say this, but the tone of the conversations has changed. And it really does sound like that, at least what I'm hearing, is more people are saying, no, we're going to go through the dark night of the soul on a global scale. And whether it is war or environmental or some intertwined series of calamities, that it is upon us now. And we're going to go deeper into it before we come out the other side. So I just want to say that that's an observation that I've made of the difference of tone and mood in the last couple of years. The last thing I'll say, and I forgot what you said, Lewis, that triggered this, but as far as the bad stuff happening, that there are these in the literature, these classical paths to world federation, transforming the UN, unifying the regions, they're having a world constitution, whatever. But if the what does hit the fan, all of that's upended. I mean, all of it, because there are organizations working on each of those paths. But the whole thing is going to be upended. So somewhere in the WFM theory of change process, we realize we need a plan B. Just like when 9/11 happened, the right had a plan B. They had their documents that in the middle of all the shock and awe, they put out things and took took the nation that way. And if what is going to hit the fan, you also know that the right wing worldwide is going to try to harness that and move things even further in that direction. So we have some recognition. I don't know that we've got a plan yet, but if stuff starts getting bad, is there a way, and the more negative ideas start coming up on the world stage more powerfully, do we have a countervailing force ready to bring that to the heads of state around the world to say, hey, you don't have to go through that dark path. There is another way to reorganize the world. So we've at least got that thought on paper. I don't know that we've got any ideas yet about how to implement it. So I'll stop there. I hope I'm under the 2 minutes. Thank you.
Implementation is always the hard part. It's yeah, ideas, you can come up with ideas. How do we get there? That's the hard part. So I remember Professor Barada will may have come across this, but I was doing my first little bit of archival work. I'm not trained as a historian, but it's incredibly fascinating. And I was looking at the archives of the campaign for world government. So Razaka Schwimmer and Lola Maverick Lloyd and Edith Winter and at the New York Public Library, and came across this script for a TV show, or notes about a script for a TV show, current event show that Winter was going to be on, and in her notes, sort of circled, was how do we get to world government? And 1948. That's the big question they were being asked. That's what they had to come up with. So I'd love to find an actual version of that show.
Thank you, Louis. Virginia?
Thank you all for this great conversation. So when I was at the Earth Summit with thousands of people, there was a vigil of all the world's religions. And we were up all night together. And in the Southern Hemisphere, they dance together. Very interesting. Very different than coming from the head. They come from the heart. And all together, we became one in the morning, and we danced together, and Dalai Lama was there. Everybody was there, and I wanted to mention that because that's the start of a movement, how that happens, how we all become one, and how we act from that. And the research that I've been working with in the last 30 years comes from a whole generation of people that have grown up since World War II, who have not formed community, who have very different values. It's called the cultural creatives, and it's done by a Stanford researcher. I'll think of his name in a minute. He and his wife, Sherry Anderson, wrote this, but there's also a similar study in the European Union of these people, this generation that has grown up, that are the fodder for this movement, that come into oneness experientially. It doesn't happen intellectually. And so I want to emphasize how important it is. You can't conceive these things. It doesn't come from the head. It comes from the heart, and how everybody can meet each other in that way. And so I just wanted to mention how important it is to consider climate change as a factor in this discussion. We don't know what the next thing that will happen, but it is another way that that nature is acting, that we have to prepare for in our consciousness. We have to consider that this is perhaps one other way that we can join together, probably afterwards rather than before. I know two people who are in the fires who, it's just a devastating thing, but I'm just aware that we cannot conceive of these things from our head. I've been in so many UN conferences where these spontaneous celebrations start, and they're not conceived in the head. They come from the heart. And I wanted to mention how important it is for us Americans, who in the eagle and the condor prophecy of the Ecuadorian shaman, says the eagle must fly with the condor. The eagle is the head and the condor is the heart. And without them flying together, we can't solve anything. And so we have to go to indigenous people as well. there's so many other groups beside the academics that have answers that are important to consider right now.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important to talk to people and to bring in voices. Yes, absolutely. I agree.
Is I'll get you the name of that Stanford researcher. It's quite remarkable.
Thank you, Virginia. And maybe since we're at 8:15 and before I wrap us up and just share some housekeeping, some updates from CGS's end to you all, I would love to hand you the floor, Louis, just for any final thoughts and maybe to end on a positive note, at least maybe selfishly from my end, a question I have for you as I kind of focus on youth engagement from our programming end. In regards to the questions you received on implementation, it would be lovely to hear what you hope that students or activists or policymakers might take away from the ideas in your book. And then on a positive note, it would be really lovely to hear what you envision as when talking about world government, what is a just and democratic global system? How would it look like in your eye?
Well, I'll take the last one first. So I think it would look like now the European Union is a laboratory, but it's got a lot of features that I think would be effectively transposed up to the global level. So it's got a lot of emphasis on people being able to advance and protect their own rights. It's got a really good ombud system. So in the book, I talk about exchanges of or mechanisms of input, exchange, appeal, or challenge. So the more we can create institutions that give people those mechanisms, I think the better, the more just the system has a chance to be. So input, of course, is voting, but also the various other ways you can give political input, whether it's in the streets, through youth movements. I think there's a lot of important opportunities there. Exchange is where we engage in actual dialogue on things that are important. So deliberative democracy, but also actual exchanges with leaders. And then appeal or mechanisms of challenge. The European Union's got that good ombud system where any citizen can file a complaint. You can, they've also got a system where citizens can get enough signatures on a petition so that it has to be considered by the parliament. And then it's got courts. So the World Court of Human Rights was mentioned. I think we're quite away from there, but we would need that in a decent system, a court where people who feel like their rights have been violated and their state won't give them satisfaction can go to a higher level of appeal. So I think a democratic system that that is rights-based, is constitutional, is federal. Nobody wants a single world government that decides everything everywhere. So you have municipalities, you have cities, you have states, you have regional organizations, you have a world government, and they're guided by a strong principle of subsidiarity, which says that things should be decided at the lowest level possible to keep it as democratic as possible, to enable people to have input. I think that's the kind of system we could be looking at. The European Union gets a lot of that right. Some of the other regional organizations, if you look at the structure of the African Union, it certainly looks like that. Implementation is always a challenge, everywhere you go. But we have a lot of models of, I think, what a decent rights advancing world government would look like. So I think there is hope. I think if we focus on how much better the world is overall than it used to be, poverty, thanks, to China, but also India, some other places, has come way down. This article that Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times writes every year. So every December, he'll write some version of this article where he'll talk about, actually things are a lot better than they used to be. So one thing I like to tell my students is, at the height or on the eve of World War I, when Britain was trying to find enough soldiers and sailors for its forces, about 25% of them had to be rejected because they had rickets, which is a disease of malnutrition. So our grandparents, our great-great-grandparents faced hunger in ways that more people in the world don't face these days. More things are better. The world's not good enough, but we're making progress, even though it may not always seem that way. And we're making progress because, good-hearted people are working really hard trying to make that happen. Right now, in the face of great resistance, but again, Trump won't last forever, nor will these others. And I think we can do better, and we will do better.
Thank you, Louis. That's a nice note to end on, and I'm excited for us to discuss the following chapters in your book in the next session. Yeah, so does anyone have any announcements to make at this time? I have a few from CGS's side, but I want to open up the floor for anyone.
Can I ask a question of one of the audience members? So, Micah, I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot, but you've been sort of studiously listening and everything. Did you have any thoughts?
Hey, Micah, if you could introduce yourself. I believe that this group hasn't yet had the privilege of meeting you.
Oh, yes. Hi, my name is Micah Bow, or Micah or Bow Work. And I am a communications intern for CGS and a student at Boston University studying political science. So I'm just in DC for this summer. And to answer your question, I don't have any like comments in particular, but and I haven't had a chance to read it, but yeah, I think that what you're doing is really good, and the topic is very interesting. But yeah, I sorry for like the lack of words.
No, I put you on the spot, but no, that's great that you're interning and getting the exposure and the experience with the global side.
May I suggest to Micah when he gets back to Boston, he contacts me.
Okay. Who is that? Winston?
Yes.
Okay.
Winston is a member of our board at CGS. And thank you, Micah, for joining us today. Yeah, it wasn't expected for Micah to read. I was surprised to see you join, so I'm very glad that you're here. And I know when I first joined CGS, just sitting in on the book club kind of helped to hear about diverse perspectives that all align with this issue area that's very close to all of our hearts, which is global governance in some way or another. So yeah, I think it's really lovely that you joined us today. Thank you.
And when you get back, ask one of your international relations professors, why don't we talk about world government in this class and see what their answer is?
Indeed.
So I saw Tad, you had your hand up. Do you have any
Thank you,
announcements?
Kashed. Yes, a quick announcement, but before I do, following Luis's lead, I'm going to put both Micah and Professor Barada on the spot, just since you mentioned that you're a student at BU, Micah. I humbly suggest that you could not possibly find a better use of your time at some point than to make a trek out. Not sure exactly where you are, Professor Barada, but Joseph and Virginia live in Massachusetts. And that would be a terrific thing for you to do, is to make a trek and do an interview. Is the level of expertise about the history of the world government idea is uniquely there in that brain that was resting a little while ago. And I recommend that. And you might be able to make a paper, a class
Yes,
paper.
I'd be delighted to see you, Micah. You know, in the Bible, the prophet Micah had a famous statement. What does the Lord require of you? Nothing but that you love mercy, do justice, and walk humbly with your God.
Thank you.
Of course, you know the history of the name Micah as well, Professor Barada. Kashed, if I may, I just had another quick announcement, and I don't have quite the details yet, but as some of you know, these days I am a president of the Southern California arm of Venerable Progressive advocacy organization called Americans for Democratic Action, founded in 1947, exactly the same year as CGS. And because of the war that was launched by Israel, I guess about 3 weeks ago, and joined by my country exactly 1 week ago today, we're putting on a nice Zoom event about the nuclear, the fallout, the double entendre I didn't quite intend, for both war and peace in general and nuclear issues in particular. Put it on your calendar. I'll try to get the details to somebody at CGS, but it's 5 p.m. Pacific on July the 10th. 5 p.m. Pacific on July the 10th. And it's going to be me interviewing Melissa Park, who is the executive director of the Nobel Peace Laureate organization called the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Love to have you all there to talk about the latest challenge to peace on Earth.
Can you get
Thank
out
you.
a link?
Dad, if
Sorry?
you have an invitation,
Yeah,
I
unfortunately.
don't have one
Thank
right
you.
now.
Unfortunately, it's not ready yet.
To me and I can
But I will definitely, thank you for asking, Lynn. Put that time on your calendar, please. And I will definitely ask somebody at CGS.
The
once
10th
we
at
get all the
5
details
Pacific.
down.
The 10th
That's
at
correct,
5.
yes. 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m., of course, Eastern. Thanks for asking.
Thank you, Tad. And please feel free to email either James or I, and we can try and circulate it with the book club group. Final announcements, Bob or Virginia? I didn't see who went first, so please feel free
Virginia,
to
go ahead.
So my studies are about a new American leadership that comes from the work of a very famous woman, peace builder named Elise Boulding. It's called Imaging It to Get the World We Want. And we have every month America's Soul Community for us to try. It's an experiential process where we use imaging and then an action plan to have the kind of America we envision and want. And it just happens to be next Wednesday from noon to 1:30. If anyone would like to attend, you can email me at virginiawoodswain@gmail.com. And the explanation of the new leadership that's needed is on my website, www.global-leader.org.
Thank you, Virginia, and please feel free to drop that also in the chat for everyone. Bob?
Yes, parallel to that initiative I mentioned before about a transnational working group to create a social movement, we have a similar group forming to beef up the educational materials that WFM puts out, first on the website and then in other venues. And we are recruiting for that group. So we're looking specifically for writers, researchers, editors, etc. I know a number of you on the call right now fit that category. So if you're interested in all your free time, you could give me a holler. I think most people know how to reach me, and I'll send you the information on that so you can see if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And then just some final updates from my end. I just wanted to remind everyone to please take a few minutes to complete our feedback survey, which we send out at the end of each meeting. So I will put that link in the chat, and please take the time to fill it out. It's quite helpful for us in ensuring that we're adapting our book club sessions to meet everyone's interests and needs, and have topics that are interesting to everyone in the group. And then one exciting update from CGS is that we have launched our New Voices for Global Solutions essay contest for this year. So I just wanted to share that we will be having a workshop for anyone that's interested on Wednesday at 12 p.m. Next Wednesday. And the deadline for the essay contest is July 11th. And I'll share the webpage for the essay contest in case you know anyone that's interested. This is a youth engagement program. We're hoping to receive essay submissions from youth throughout the United States, aged 18 to 26. So if you know anyone that you think is a great writer and is interested in topics that are relevant to us, our I won't give you the whole spiel, but our theme is focusing on providing opportunity for young people's voices to share innovative solutions to global challenges. So if you know anyone, please do share with them our webpage for the essay contest so we can receive as many great submissions as possible. So thank you, everyone. And then in regards to our next session, as I mentioned at the start, this is the first of 3 sessions that we'll be having for this book with Lewis. So please keep an eye out for an invitation from James. He will send it out, the July invitation, in the coming weeks. And yeah, we look forward to continuing this discussion in a month.
Great. Thanks, everyone. It's been great. Excellent questions.
Thank you, Louis, and thank everyone else. Discussion.
Thanks. And I will stay on in case anyone has any questions or would like to talk about